You're not alone. If you need someone to talk to today, please contact Crisis Services Canada by either calling them at 1-833-456-4566 all hours of the day, or you can text them at 45645 at 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern Time. Remember, you're not alone, and Crisis Services Canada is here to help. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to this special edition of this show, the ASTV Productions Seattle Kraken Expansion Mock Draft. I'm one of your co-hosts, Graeme Forsyth, joined by my other co-host from the AAA show here on ASTV Productions, Jared Down. Jared, I know you're so excited to give your picks and just give your opinion on who you thought Seattle should have drafted. I was surprised to see that basically the whole roster got leaked. I'm pretty sure Detroit is the only team that hasn't had a player picked yet, if I'm not mistaken. But it's great to be here with you, man. How are you doing?
Well, I was doing pretty good this morning. Woke up excited to do this mock draft, and then you slowly see the deadline come up, and Frank Saravelli, he decides just to kind of spoil some of our fun today and release the whole team pretty much. But yeah, a lot of surprises. Be interested to see what the side deals come ahead, but I think the biggest one for me right off the bat is Carolina's Jake Bean not being selected. I had him kind of pegged as a lock for this expansion draft. A young defenseman who was a WHL Defenseman of the Year 2 years ago in the WHL, and kind of got buried in that deep lineup. And I'm guessing there's a side deal there, but that's my biggest shock so far of the day.
Yeah, Jake Bean for sure. I saw a lot of people having him in their mocks, you included. And yeah, it was between him or Geeky for me, just in terms of just like the price you'd be getting them for. But I lean towards Bean for like reasons like you said, him being a shifty, versatile defenseman. It would have been interesting to see if he could gotten a look on this Seattle Kraken blue line, but that wasn't the case. What are your thoughts on a guy like Vladimir Tarasenko not being chosen when it seems like a lot of people were thinking he'd go there?
Well, if you would have asked me this a couple of days ago, I would have said you would be dumb not to take him. But the more and more I started playing around on the cap-friendly expansion draft simulator, just kind of seeing how I can create a roster with certain guys. And, his cap hit's pretty high up there. And I know it's only for 2 years. And I just felt that, there's other teams that had, say, maybe even a JVR who I know they didn't take. But St. Louis had a couple other guys on their roster that they could replace a Tarasenko. So a Blaze or a Dunn who, if you pass on a similar guy to Tarasenko on another team, you're not going to be able to find that much depth from that roster. So I just felt like there's too much value in a Dunn or a Blaze to worth it taking Tarasenko.
Yeah, and I ended up taking Vladimir Tarasenko. I guess that's a spoiler already from who I'm picking from St. Louis. But just looking at it, I just looked at the amount of years he has left on that contract, and I feel like he's going to be motivated coming this season. Just new situation for sure because he won't be playing in St. Louis, but just that ability to bring a guy in, even though he is 7.5, he's coming off a year where, he had surgery and stuff like that. This is a guy that's traditionally put up 30 goals. It's just I picked him on my roster because I feel like you can really find that anywhere else in terms of the guys that are there. But yeah, let's just dive into it now, starting off with team one. I'll let you go first most of the time, and then I'll go in with my pick. But let's go with Anaheim Ducks to start off alphabetically. They're the first team in the league with the first letter being an A. So, who do you end up taking from the Anaheim Ducks with your selection?
So I had Hayden Fleury, which I believe Anaheim ended up taking. He's pretty strong, young defenseman, another guy who got buried in that Carolina system. Got moved to Anaheim last year, and kind of another shifty guy who I feel like if got the right work on the power play, he could maybe quarterback a second power play unit or something, or he could be even a trade bait for another team. I know what's a strategy that Vegas used was, load up on D-man, and there's going to be teams looking for it. So that's kind of why I went Fleury.
Yeah, just looking at it, I also have Hayden Fleury being taken. You just look at the options available. I did an original mock draft on Monday on Rise and Shine Manitoba, changed it up quite a bit just after looking at it because I wasn't too happy with it. But Hayden Fleury, cost significantly less than Shattenkirk. He's younger, 25 years old. He probably won't get a spot in the lineup, but he could have a chance to, potentially get into a team's bottom six, maybe even play a top four pairing if it lines up for it. But just that contract he's at, not too bad. The age is good too, and teams need defense all the time, right? So Hayden Fleury, like you said, could be used in a side deal or something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Moving on to the Arizona Coyotes. Who'd you got there? I'm pretty sure we got the same player.
I had Christian Fischer. I believe he's in the right wing there in Arizona, and kind of coming from a long list of younger players who just haven't been able to develop in Arizona. I don't know. It's just the atmosphere there, the developmental team there. I feel like hasn't had the chance to really grow there, and I feel like given the right opportunities, he could be one of those guys that maybe a William Karlsson effect in Seattle, where he just gets more ice time and just the little chip on his shoulder and can flourish. But obviously they decide to go elsewhere, but that's where I would have went.
Yeah, I was also looking at Michael Bunting, just him being at 25 years old. He showed, some potential in the places that he's played in, but Christian Fischer for sure the better pick. You got him for $1 million. Being an RFA next year in 2022, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him this year, the type of season that he has. But just out of the guys there, out of the value, I feel like you get the best bang for your buck in terms of the potential that this guy brings, as well as, the production that he could bring as well. Moving into the Boston Bruins, there were some interesting choices here. I decided to go with a D-man on this team. You did too. Who was the D-man that you ended up selecting?
I was on the fence between Jeremy Lauzon and Connor Clifton. Ultimately, it came down to Clifton's contract for me. He's a high-energy guy. That $1 million a year for, I believe he's got an extra year on his deal. Possibly even carrying him into 2 years from now. I'd have to double check here.
Yeah, but it would be 2023 would be when he's UFA. Yeah.
So coming down to that contract, that's kind of what sold me on him. Plus, I felt there was kind of a toss between players. Clifton has a little more of a edgy side to his game, I find, and that's kind of why I decided to go that road.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. I just decided to go with Lauzon, yeah. Just because of I'm looking at it now, Clifton would have been a good choice too, but I just went based off of just a little less money, even though he is there for 1 year. This is a guy that is played, in a bottom six, top four times role with the Boston Bruins. Just 2 years younger than Clifton, but obviously going with Clifton wouldn't have been an issue at all. But I just decided to go with Lauzon. Going into the Buffalo Sabres, I know that, I hope no one picked Jeff Skinner in their mock draft. Man, probably the worst contract in the NHL if you pick him up. But yeah, who do you select from the Buffalo Sabres?
I went with William Borgen for pretty much just a lack of depth on that options, and just primarily because just looking at other mocks and experts saying that's probably the route they're going to go. I didn't feel too strongly about any other choices on this roster, so I kind of just played with what I was reading on this one, and don't have a lot of knowledge on the player. I know he's a younger right hand or right D, a depth guy that maybe he won't be on the roster this year probably, but it's something that could come up mid-season or maybe next season.
Yeah, William Borgen for me, I picked him as well. It's just the lack of options, like you said. There's not really much to choose from there, and plus this guy's a younger guy, right? 24 years old. More depth on that D, more D added to the I guess their talent pool. But yeah, he won't be a regular player even playing in on the roster this year in the NHL, in my opinion. But definitely not a bad piece to have in terms of just the players that were there available to take from Buffalo. Moving into Calgary, starting off, I'll start this one off actually. Mark Giordano, that's my pick from Calgary. Just seems like everything lines up. I feel like his time with Calgary was running on empty, right? Just he's been there for so long, and you got a player like Mark Giordano, a guy that won the Norris 2 years ago. Yes, he's dropped off, since then, but this is a guy. Give him a new situation, a new scenery. This is who's a guy who's going to have impact immediately on the lineup. You got that veteran presence and a guy that's been a captain too. No better pick from the Calgary Flames than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I had Giordano too, and like you said, the captain. I think that's a good. It plays into a factor there. And you need a guy that can bring a lot of leadership to a team that's on full reset. Right, it's no one's really going to have a whole lot of chemistry in that organization right off the bat. So, and like you said, he's only 2 years removed from Norris. Struggled this year, but I mean, let's just say COVID. It's a little more challenging. I would imagine a lot of players would have a hard time getting up to play in an empty arena every day. So I think he should be slotted in the top two. I know there's rumblings of possibly a draft and trade with the Rangers, so it'll be interesting to watch what happens there.
Yeah, that'd be interesting for sure. But even if he does not get traded, like if he stays, like you said, and like I said, this team has a veteran, a captain, a guy that's 2 years removed from Norris. Why not give him a shot and throw some money at him there? Moving into the Carolina Hurricanes, you start off with this one. You got Jake Bean. Yeah, you going with yours. You went with Jake Bean.
Yeah, he's got a heavy shot, and like I said before, we got the show started here. He WHL Defenseman of the Year 2 years ago. Just was buried in that lineup, and I know Carolina is very high on him, so I suspect this is going to be a spot where we see a side deal. And if there is no side deal, I'd be very interested to see Ron Francis' decision on not to draft Jake Bean. I don't really care how many D you draft, even if you play him in the A1 year. He's a guy that, for a new team, that I think you just got to take.
Yeah, and the reason I was stumbling there, trying to get you to explain your pick, is because we talked about Jake Bean, then I was kind of getting confused if we already talked about him already, which we did, but we'll dive into him some more. Yeah, Jake Bean for me, like I said, I had Connor Geekie at first. That's who they ended up selecting, but I ended up changing it after to Jake Bean. Shortly after releasing my first mock, just because of like the potential that he has, the potential with just how shifty of a defender he is, like you said, a WHL Defender of the Year 1 year. And like you said, a guy with a heavy shot, just loading up on prospects. You could use him in a side deal, like you alluded to as well. So it was a bit of a head scratcher for sure, them not taking Jake Bean, but we'll have to see what happens with Morgan Geekie in Seattle. Moving on to the Chicago Blackhawks. Who do you end up taking?
I bounced around a lot on this one. Initially I had Vinny Hinostroza, a quick, fast little guy that could play the PK. And then I was thinking maybe they go Kelvin DeHaan, a D-man. He's only got 1 year left on his deal after this year at 4.5 cap hit. An excellent candidate for a draft and trade guy. But in the end, I decided to go Adam Gaudette, a guy that I believe initially was in Vancouver. It's a strong prospect coming up. He could play in the bottom 6. But ultimately they decided to go elsewhere in that. But Gaudette would have been my choice there.
Yeah, I also bounced around with this one. I looked at D with Zadorov, 26 years old, still at a decent age of 26. But I ended up going with Gaudette just in terms of building more, depth up the middle for the lack of depth that they had to select from, which was pretty interesting to see the lack of depth. But, yeah, Gaudette, a guy that I feel like could play in the bottom 6 with how this team would be constructed right now. And yeah, 24 years old, not even making $1 million, even though he's an RFA this year. You can still probably get him for that price, which is nice too. We're going to go to our first commercial break here in this episode. I forgot to say the sponsors of the Seattle Kraken expansion mock draft special here on ASTV Productions. The special is brought to you by AETI, Evolve Green, and Toby Hockey. We're going to hear from one of our new sponsors now in AETI, and we'll be back after the break to continue talking about our picks that we selected for the expansion draft. Take a look. Welcome back to the Seattle Kraken expansion mock draft special here on ASTV Productions. Of course, me and Jared Down, Jared being the host of the AAA show here on ASTV Productions, have just been going through the team so far of who we would have selected in the draft. We'll just, go through the list so far of what we've said, who we've picked, or I guess the teams that we've gone through. We've gone through Anaheim, Arizona, Boston, Buffalo, Calgary, Carolina, and Chicago so far. Just in terms of the players that were selected from those teams. Let's just see here. So Seattle ended up picking Hayden Fleury from the Anaheim Ducks. Me and Jared both had Hayden going there. They ended up picking Tyler Pitlick from the Arizona Coyotes. Me and Jared had Fisher going there. Boston ended up picking Jeremy Lauzon, who ended up going to Seattle. That was my pick. Jared ended up going with Clifton. And then Borgen, me and Jared both had him going from Buffalo. And then Calgary, Mark Giordano got selected in the draft. Me and Jared both had him. Morgan Geekie got selected from Carolina to Seattle. Me and Jared both had Jake Bean. And then this one, John Quenneville going to Chicago. Me and Jared both had Gaudette. Just quick thoughts real quick about them choosing John Quenneville in the draft from Chicago.
This one was kind of a shocker for me. I didn't know he's 25. If this would have been John Quenneville 3 years ago, I'd be a little more all over it. But he just strikes me as one of those guys that, they had a strong junior career and just didn't develop into the star that they maybe could have been, projected as earlier on. And I feel like at age 25, he hasn't really shown the ability to really step up in the NHL level. And I just feel like I don't want to say a wash of a pick, but I feel like there's more value elsewhere.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that. Obviously, like you said, I don't really know much about John Quenneville, but for sure, just a guy that really, checking his stats too, hasn't really, shown much throughout his career so far. I just feel like Adam Gaudette, a year younger, more upside in that pick for sure. But Seattle, that's the pick they decided to go with. So moving into the upcoming teams here, the Colorado Avalanche, the Kraken ended up going with Jonas Donskoy. And that was my pick too. Your pick was also Donskoy as well, correct?
Correct. Yeah, just one of those guys that I know, two-way guy who has shown in the past to be very strong offensively. You've seen that in San Jose in their playoff runs, and that is a guy that could step up the lineup if need be. I kind of had him pegged on my just kind of depth chart that I made out of the roster as a second or third liner right winger there who can play up if needed on the power play and penalty kill. His cap hit is a little up there for my liking at 3.9 mil, but he does bring that level of game like a Barclay Goodrow or a Coleman that you've seen with the Tampa Bay Lightning this year in their playoff run.
Yeah, and the cap hit was the biggest thing for me, just in terms of him making that much money. You'd like to maybe spend it in other places, but with Donskoy, like you said, this is a player that can, be in the top 6 or top 9 of a team. And, this is a guy that's had experience. He's a guy that, can bring a lot to a line and be a good role player for a line. Not a guy that's going to carry a line, obviously, but definitely a good depth piece added to the Seattle Kraken with this pick. Moving into the Columbus Blue Jackets, Gavin Bayreuther, is that how you pronounce his name?
Iowa sounds right.
I think so. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Gavin Bayreuther. Let's just roll with that. He gets picked by Seattle from the Columbus Blue Jackets. Who you end up taking from the Blue Jackets? Do you have this pick, or did you roll with someone else?
I just want to apologize. I have never heard of this player, and I haven't had time to look him up. I went with Gabriel Carlson. Left-handed D, only 24. He's an RFA next year. One of those guys I think Columbus has kind of been hoping he steps up. I believe he's a bit of a bigger body. I just would have went that road just based on youth and that he could play as an edge lineup guy or in your top pairing in your AHL team until you had an opening.
You know what? I'm gonna check who they pick because, I've never heard of this guy. Let's see who they picked. Let's see. Yeah, that is who they picked. They ended up picking him. As crazy as that is, never heard of him. But I ended up going with Max Domi for my pick, just in terms of the center depth available in this draft. This is a guy that, has declined since that season he had when he hit 70 points, over 70 points. But, this is a guy, even though he's at 5.3 mil, ends up having a good season. He's not a guy that's going to be here for long-term, say. Maybe he could be used in a side deal as well. But, either way, he goes out and has a good year. His trade value will be up. You could look to move him. Even if he has a bad year, I feel like the Domi name always keeps him in relevancy. So maybe he could have some trade value still if he doesn't have the greatest year. But overall, this team gets a centerman who's, proven he can put up 70 points in his career, more around like 40 points, I'd say, this year or something like that. But overall, went with this pick just because of the lack of center depth in the draft. Moving on.
I floated around Domi. He just seems to be falling to the wrong coach. I don't know if he needs a people's coach. And I just feel like, maybe it was Torts that was dragging him down. And it's tough to say how he's going to go with the new coach coming in. I loved watching him in junior, but it's just the inconsistency, the inability to prove himself as a center is why I drifted away from that pick.
Yeah, and definitely it's a riskier pick, but like I said, for me it was just that's value at center in this draft. I feel like he was one of those guys that could have been picked, and like you said, his situation with Torts wasn't the best. Maybe if he gets to Seattle, like some other guys, could have a fresh start and could potentially get sort of back to that form he was at. But moving into the Dallas Blue Jackets, they end up picking Jamie Oleksiak Who do you end up going with from
I
pick?
went with Adam Masterson. I originally had Alexiak, but I went with Adam just because of his productivity in the AHL. In his last couple of years, really, he was practically a point per game player and a guy that just never had the opportunity to crack the lineup. He's only 23, just turned 23 this year. I feel like that's one of those guys that he could maybe squeak up the lineup if given the opportunity. But I think Alexiak still turned out to be a great pick. He proved himself well in the playoff run in the bubble there, and I can see the reasoning behind going there.
Yeah, at first when I did a mock, I went with Ben Bishop, but switched it just because of the uncertainty. Will he be the same type of goaltender after missing an entire season due to him missing it from surgery? But I ended up going on the defensive side of things and going with Alexiak, a big left-handed defenseman that could play in a team's bottom six, adds good depth, and getting him at the price he's a UFA, so they could even get him for maybe potentially less, which could be nice. But moving into the Edmonton Oilers, who's your pick from Oiltown?
I went with Tyler Benson, a guy that was a stud in junior, and another one of those guys who just hasn't had the opportunity to develop properly or get the chance. He's a point per game player in the A. And I just feel like he was a guy that, they take a chance on, and maybe he proves himself in camp that he can be a top 9 forward. And ultimately, I think this one was a bit of a head scratcher. I guess I understand the reason behind Larson. He's a guy that can't play top 4. I just felt that maybe they would have went elsewhere on defense.
Yeah, I was thinking Oscar Clefbaum at first, but I decided between the two, and I ended up going with Larson just because of the lack of right-handed defensemen here. This is a guy that signed for $4 million, so his price, goes down a bit, I guess. I don't really know how the math works with that, but, this is a guy that can play in the top 4 on a team. He's a guy that, still 28 years old. I do understand Benson, though, if they would have went with that, like you said, just him being younger, showing his potential in the A. But I just felt just for the lack of right-handed defenseman in this draft, I would have went with, Adam Larson, or I guess, valuable right-handed defenseman. Moving into the Florida Panthers, I feel like this is an easy pick. It got announced, earlier than a lot of picks, I think earlier than almost all of them. But Chris Driedger from the Florida Panthers gets picked here. I'm assuming that you went with the goaltender at this one?
Yes, I did, and for obvious reasons. He was almost the better goalie all year there in Florida. And I think if Bob didn't have the cap hit that he did and the investment, they might have played him even more. But it'll be interesting to see what happens now that he goes to a different team that's might not have the same style of a roster as Quenneville does, and might be a little more loosely operated. Hard to say. I don't know exactly on Hackstill's coaching styles, but good for him. And he got a nice contract there, 3-year, $3.5 million, and looking for good things from him.
Yeah, I went with him too. Like you said, he was statistically the better goaltender this year than Bob. Even though his playoffs weren't the greatest, they were undermanned with Ekblad being out, right, and just that Tampa team being as stacked as they are. But yeah, this is a guy I feel like has shown a lot of potential so far in his career to being that number one guy. It's yet to be seen if he can carry the full load for a full season, but the price that they're getting him at, cheaper than a guy like Carey Price or a guy like Bishop, a guy like Holtby, guys that are, on the back nines of their careers. So I think Driedger, a great pick for them. And have they announced how much they're signing him for yet?
Yeah, I believe it is. It's 3 years. I think it's 3 years, $3.5 million a year, I believe.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good price for a goaltender that's shown potential, and yeah, I feel like that's a great pick for the Seattle Kraken. Moving into the LA Kings, they end up drafting Curtis McDermott. I ended up going with a different guy. I'm assuming you did too.
Yeah, I went with Cale Clegg.
Yeah.
He's a younger D-man who, he struggled this year. He's only 23. I watched him a lot in junior, being from Swift Current. He played Moose Jaw and Brandon, and I've seen him a lot. Every other week, it seemed like, and just a good, strong skater. I feel like he just needs to get caught up to speed in the NHL, and he can turn into a solid player. He's offensive, he's quick, he's got a good first pass. He just needs a little more time to develop. And as a young guy coming into a COVID season, I imagine it's extra hard to adjust to the speed in the game.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt about it, especially with just how a lot of these guys didn't even have playing time, the young guys. Like a guy like Lafreniere, you looked at him and how he struggled this season. I feel like that definitely had a huge part of it. But that's besides the point. I also went with Cale Clegg. Just, the potential he has. Like he said, he's a strong skater. And, just... I feel like, if he doesn't get a shot in Seattle, maybe he can still be traded, or he could be traded and used in an offer, depending on how they want to use him if they did pick him. But
Jack Eichel
potentially too. So yeah, you never know what type of possibilities this team could have had if they picked him. But they ended up going with McDermott, and $875K should be not a bad contract to have, but I would have went with Clegg like you. But moving on to Minnesota, then we'll take another commercial break. Minnesota ends up going with Carson Soucy, $2.75 million on his contract. Who do you end up going with here in Minnesota?
I went with Kaapo Kähkönen. And not for what reasons that some guys did. I went with Kähkönen as a draft and trade candidate there. I feel like goaltending market's going to be pretty hot this year, and I felt like this is going to be a good opportunity to bring in a young goalie who proved himself fairly well last year, move him for a decent asset. Soucy was a good choice as well, but I felt like with the amount of D available that they could have maybe grabbed Kähkönen and moved him for a young forward or someone who could bring help longer.
Yeah, I also picked. No, I didn't pick him. Let's see who I picked. I ended up picking Carson Soucy. Yeah, I ended up picking Soucy because I remember I had Zadorov, and then I changed to Gaudette and added Soucy. But you get that big defenseman, a guy that will probably be playing somewhere along the lines of their bottom six, maybe top four. I don't know. I haven't really seen him play, but he's got size. I feel like that's a big reason they chose him, and he's 26 years old. 2 more deals on his contract, making $2.75 million. And yeah, I do like that thinking with Kähkönen because he's shown his potential so far. And like you said, the goaltending market is going to be hot and could be a good trade piece for sure if they would have went with him. But yeah, I went with Carson Soucy. We're going to stop for a sec or a moment and go to another commercial break here in the show. We're going to hear from Evolve Green. It's about a 1-minute commercial. So me and Jared will be back in about a minute to continue talking about our picks and just the picks that Seattle made in the expansion draft coming up here on ASTV Productions, on the ASTV Productions Seattle Kraken expansion mock draft.
Why go solar? Solar is better than ever. Our revolutionary design and inverter equipment with the latest in solar panel technology for the ultimate in-home and business security. That's right, I said security. Grid security and security of your home are linked. Fortify your future today with a battery backup system. No maintenance, quiet running. Did you know in Manitoba, grid-connected, off-grid, and battery backup systems are 100% right off in the year you purchase for any company or farm. Do you want to back up your internet, keep your tills running, and the lights on? We can install a system that is right for you, with battery backup fully capable of taking on all those essential loads and keeping you running. When you call our experts at Evolve Green, ask about getting your free energy audit today. Call or email today to find out what system works best for you. 1-866-5EVOLVE or support@evolvegreen.ca. Also, be sure to check out our website at www.evolvegreen.ca.
Welcome back to the ASTV Productions Seattle Kraken expansion mock draft special here on ASTV Productions. Me and Jared have gone through every team up until Minnesota to this point. Do we know who got picked from Detroit yet? Has there been any news on that?
I briefly saw it on Twitter, I believe. It was a guy that I had been considering. I think it was Dennis Chowalowski, I believe. I could be wrong if that was just a prediction thrown in there or not. I know CBY was being pretty stingy on that one. So
Detroit Red Wings.
Chowalowski, I believe, was the pick, but I could be wrong.
Kraken. We'll look it up here. Yeah, it was. It was him. It was Dennis Chowalowski. Yeah. Yeah. So is that who you had going there? Who do you have going from Detroit?
I had him initially, but then I had gone with Troy Stretcher just because Chowalowski being on the left-handed side and based on the rest of my picks, I just didn't see a fit there for him, and I thought possibly Detroit would try and throw in a mid-round draft pick just to try and keep him, given his age and his ability. But I guess not. They let him go, and I like that pick a lot for Seattle. He brings a Jake Bean level of prospect, I guess, talent towards that team. Maybe not quite as solid. He's a little more of a two-way flyer on the ice kind of guy, I believe, from his junior days, and I believe he played in Prince George. But yeah, I like the pick there. Didn't miss out on that one.
Yeah, that's a good pick for sure. Just with the potential that he can have, I ended up going with Stetcher, just because of, like you said, right-handed defenseman. Just nice to have those in this draft, just because of the options that were presented. And yeah. Troy Stetcher could be a guy, that potentially plays in the lineup, but, depending on the options that they would have, it's going to be interesting to see where he fits in. Moving into the Montreal Canadiens, they end up going with Cale Fleury. He's going to be an RFA, young defenseman. You ended up going with a centerman from that team, though. Who was the center that you ended up picking?
I took a chance, and I thought maybe they'd try and strike a deal with Philip Deneau, just purely on the point that the lack of centers in this draft class, I guess if you want to call it, available players. He's a strong two-way guy. They're going to have the cap room to re-sign him. And, he could play anywhere in your lineup. And I think he really proved himself well in the playoffs here that, he could be a shutdown center. And for a team that may be struggling to get going, to have a shutdown center like Deneau will go a long ways. But maybe they still could in free agency. Hard to say. But getting a young D-man in Fleury, who I believe can play the right side, is a good choice.
Yeah, I went with Hayden Fleury just because of I was thinking about it, adding a guy like Paul Byron at first, but just the money he makes, and he's on the back, he's only getting older. I decided not to go with him. Philip Deneau would be sweet for this team just because of the lack of center depth. I do agree with that, but I ended up going with Cale Fleury. 22 years old, a prospect that, could, potentially be on an NHL roster someday. He's still young. He's, you're going to re-sign him for a nice amount of money because he hasn't really had any reps in the NHL yet, and he's just getting going. But yeah, I ended up going with Cale Fleury, another right-handed defenseman added to the Seattle Kraken in my mock draft. Moving into the Nashville Predators, they end up going with it's Cale Yarncroc? Cale Yarncroc?
Yeah, Yarncroc.
Yeah, Yarncroc. Ended up going with him. I ended up going with him as well. He showed a lot of promise this season, I think, with the Nashville Predators, just for the type of player he is. He ended up playing on the top 6 on this team. And yeah, this is a guy making $2 million who had a solid season. And yeah, could be a guy that could be a good piece for the Seattle Kraken. And that's who they ended up going with in Yarncroc.
Yeah, and I had Cale too. Like you said, he's strong. He had a good season. He could play up and down the lineup. Has a bit of an offensive side to him. A good contract, $2 million a year was another thing. And I wasn't gonna. I've seen a lot of guys with Duchesne and Johansson. And I wondered if Nashville was going to try and pony up an offer to sway the Kraken into taking one of those guys. But those contracts are just too hefty to take on with the down years those guys had. And I see Yarncroc is having the same kind of effect as David Perron did for the Vegas Golden Knights. He can put up 30 goals this year, I believe, for the Kraken if he puts in the effort. And I really like this pick. This is one of my favorite picks that I had in my mock draft alone, and I was hoping they'd go this route.
Yeah, and it's a sweet price too for a player like this. $2 million, a guy that could, like you said, put up 30 goals potentially this season, which would be pretty sweet. And yeah, I totally agree about Matt Duchesne and Ryan Johansson. Even though there was lack of center depth in this mock draft, like, come on, if I'm a GM, I'm not spending that much money on Matt Duchesne or Ryan Johansson at their points in their career. But yeah, moving on to the New Jersey Devils, they ended up taking Nathan Bastian. That's who I also ended up having. Just in terms of pricing, you got a right wing. Build I guess some pieces into that forward core, a guy that's not going to be playing in the lineup, I don't think, but could be a guy that you potentially, I don't know, you'll have him in your farm system at least. But yeah, just in terms of pricing, I know that PK Subban, tempting taking him there because he could have a bounce back season. He's still interesting to see what he'll be able to do this season with the down years that he's had. But $9 million for him didn't really sound too convincing for me. Will Butcher already got D on my roster, but yeah, Nathan Bastian, add some forwards into the mix. That's why I picked him based on his price too.
Yeah, I decided to spend the money on Subban in this situation. The right-handed D was the draw there. I had been looking at my cap situation when I got to the Devils there, and I had the money I could spend. Only 1 year left on this deal. Pretty eccentric player, and I see him as I'd be a good market for Subban. Seattle's known to have these type of players, the Marshawn Lynch of the NFL. Guys that probably don't work out in some markets, and I feel like this is a spot that Subban could kind of flourish. He could play the power play. He, like you said, he had a down year and could bounce back. I feel like it's a good spot, and if need be, they could eat half the salary at come deadline and move him to a contender who needs a bottom 6 player essentially, because you're not going to want to come in and play the top 4 minutes probably, but he could add a lot of depth to a playoff team.
Yeah, for sure. PK, like that's probably the biggest reason, is just because of the down year you had. Do you want to put in that risk of spending $9 million? But like you said, eccentric player that can play in pretty much, in situations like the power play. And yeah, it would have been awesome. The Marshawn Lynch of the NHL and Seattle and the NHL would have been awesome. But moving on to the New York Islanders. I bounced around a lot with this. They ended up taking Jordan Eberle. I had Josh Bailey at first just because he was a bit less, and they're about the same age. But I went with Jordan Eberle. I also had Kiefer Bellows in there too, but cutting down on price with that team. But Jordan Eberle, for me, he's such a fun player to watch. He's a guy that's going to play top six for you. He's a guy that's very good at setting guys up and moving that puck around. This is a guy that's been instrumental, I think, to what the New York Islanders have been able to do in the last two playoff runs that they've had, just playing a big role on that top six and just playing with a guy like Jordan Eberle. And this is a guy, great hands, very, very shifty player, I'd say. A veteran, a guy that's had playoff experience for the last 2 years. That's pretty valuable, and that's also one of the reasons too I picked him, is because of that playoff experience too. And just I think he still has more to give.
Yeah, I went Josh Bailey, and partially because I felt Josh Bailey is one of the more underrated players in this league. I love his game. He can score 35 goals a season if you need him to. He can play the PK. He's a good two-way guy that can play anywhere in your lineup. I know I said that a lot with a lot of these guys, but he's a true top six forward, I believe, and could play the power play, good left-hand shot. He can play left or right wing, wherever we need him to do. So he can play that offside wing, which is so big in a roster like this, where you draft a bunch of guys and trying to pencil them into situations that I think that could go a long ways. And I like Eberle. I love he's being Canadian. We've all loved that moment there against Russia, but I just felt like Bailey was the best fit for this organization.
Yeah, and you bring up that amazing goal that he scored to tie the game, and it was an amazing call by my man Gordon Miller too, until the guy, Aaron McGuire, that man ruined one of the potentially the best calls, one of the best moments. But aside from that, we'll get into that another day. But moving into the New York Rangers, I had Colin Blackwell. I feel like almost everyone had Colin Blackwell. Just made sense because of the price he's at. A guy that can play on the right wing, a guy that's can put up points in the 20 ranges, a guy that's going to be very good on that bottom six. Believe I have him playing fourth line with the line combinations I got. But yeah, just in terms of the price and potentially him I guess for him coming in, being that key role player on that fourth line, that bottom six at least will be huge for this team to get him at this price.
Yeah, I have Blackwell as well, and he's creeping up there in age for a guy who's kind of coming into the league at 28 years old now. But I know, being a big fantasy sports guy, Blackwell had stretches this year where he was hot, and you want him on your fantasy team. So if you're putting him on your fantasy team, he's doing something right. So it's a good guy to take a chance on, and maybe he can climb up the lineup and pitch in 10, 15 goals a season.
Yeah, for sure. Moving into the Ottawa Senators, they end up picking Joey Decord. I ended up picking Joey Decord too, just a player that could 24 years old, goaltender, adding to the goaltending pool that they have. Maybe he can sit back and develop in their system that they have in either the farm system or wherever, maybe getting some games this year in the lineup as well. We'll see. I'm not too sure. I don't know much about him, but always good to have a young goaltender in that mix.
Yeah, I enjoyed the core to start with too, and I was humming and hawing. I ended up drifting away from Joey Decord, and I was between Chris Tierney and Evgeny Dadonov. And at the end of the day, it came down to the main goal. And I know Dadonov, he can play the left or right wing. And passing on Tarasenko, I felt like this is a guy that, he's got 2 years left, I guess, on his deal. He's strong with the Islanders, and I feel like he could come in and maybe fire a few of the net for the Kraken.
Yeah, Evgeny Dadonov, really good player. Like you said, the potential is definitely there. But yeah, just for me picking Joe Decord, just looking at his track record, it's been solid where he's played at. And yeah, they add a young goaltender to this team. And yeah, moving into the Philadelphia Flyers now. This was my first big spend since Giordano. Let's see here. Yeah, in terms of guys making upwards of that $6-7 million range, I went with James Van Riemsdyk, just because this is a guy that has established himself as a top 6 player in this league, right? He's a guy that can not only put the puck in the net, but can set guys up as well. Just looking at him play, he's a guy that works really hard in the corners. He's got some grit to his game. He's a guy that's a good two-way player too, I'd say. His possession stats are there. He's a guy that can possess that puck. He's bigger, so he's going to be good down low. Potentially how they use him, but he's going to be good on, going into the corners and setting his guys up, especially with the line that I'm going to have him on. I got him listed as first line. And yeah, I think it's worth it for them to spend the $7 million. He's got 2 years left on his deal, and who knows, he could have some breakout years here with the Seattle Kraken if they gave him a shot. But they ended up going with, didn't even announce who they picked. They ended up going with Carson Twarynski. Yeah, ended up going with him. What are your thoughts on that pick, and then get into who you ended up picking from them?
I feel like this is just kind of a cap-saving decision. He's 23. I believe he got some action on the bottom 6 last year. Could be wrong, but maybe he could step in as an injury replacement this season. But I also went JVR. This is kind of where I went into spending money. At the end of the day, I came out 16 million cap space, so the money was still well spent. I think JVR, he can still get 30 goals if you need him. Big body, like you said, he could play down in the corners. I just felt they could be a playoff contender right away with the right guys, and then this guy would definitely help.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like even though he is 7 mil, I feel like he has that ability to put up the goals. And he's a good all-around player in that offensive zone. And yeah, would have been cool if they took Voracek or him, but yeah, they end up going younger and getting an RFA this year. But going with Pittsburgh, they end up going with Brandon Tanev. Get your thoughts on this one and who you picked.
I like it. They don't love the cap hit in the term. That's kind of what scared me off of it. I believe he's under contract up to 2025 at $3.5 million. He's fast though, and he can kill penalties. Just felt like they drafted a lot of players like this, and I don't know. It could pan out depending on who they end up keeping and not trading. I just felt they have a lot of the guys in this role, and they could have been elsewhere.
Yeah, for this one, I ended up going with Aston Reese, even though he's going to be an RFA this year. This is a guy that, another guy that can play on the fourth line in your lineup, a guy that, spent years in Pittsburgh, right? This is a guy at $1 million. I would have gone with Tanev, but because of that contract and, I love Tanev, being a Winnipeg Jets fan from his days here with him, just bringing that energy to a team. But I just feel like $3.5 million for him could be used elsewhere. So I rolled with Aston Reese and, kind of went with that pick. Moving into the San Jose Sharks, they end up picking Alexander True. I picked up. I ended up picking Gramble, a centerman, young centerman. I'm pretty sure from what I've seen, he's a big centerman too. That could be good if he develops in. Could potentially play like, I see him on that fourth line, could play up until the third line if he pans out. But yeah, just went with him because of his price. And yeah, obviously Alexander True, could be a good pick too since Seattle picked him.
Yeah, I also went Gambrel, a good young player. He is a Seattle boy, born just north of Seattle. That's why I kind of had him as a lock there. But Alex True, I believe he's a Swiss center. Had a heck of a World Junior career for Switzerland, and a heck of a junior career. He played his WHL days in Seattle, so he's got some ties to Seattle, so I can see why he's going there. Big body guy. I would have leaned Dylan, but I can see the reasoning behind True. He could play that line, third line.
Yeah, like for some of these picks, I just ended up, picking like a guy like Gambrel because of his size, his potential. But yeah, Alex True, like he said, good World Junior days and has ties to Seattle as well. So. Throughout his career. But yeah, moving into St. Louis, they end up going with Vince Dunn. I'll get your pick first before I tell you mine.
Well, a couple days ago, I would have said you're crazy for not taking Tarasenko, but the more I looked into it, it just made too much sense. 24 years old, you get him on a good deal. You can play both sides of the D. There's more value in taking him and spending money on a guy that can score goals on another team. I know you don't have that elite goal scorer like Tarasenko, but you have guys that can score 30 goals elsewhere on other teams to pick from. At the end of the day, there's no one else who had it done in their lineup to choose from. Hard to go wrong there.
Yeah, and Dunn, a guy that could give you top 4 minutes, right? A guy that's shown potential as an offensive defenseman too in his junior career. But yeah, I ended up going with Sanko. Just like I said earlier, why not give him a shot? He makes $7.5 million. You only have him for 2 more years. Could be a nice change of scenery for him. This is a guy traditionally that puts up 30 goals in that range when he's healthy. And you are right, there are guys like, they could have, like if I chose a Dadonov, like this is a guy that has potential to put up or has put up 30 goals. And yeah, I just feel like for me with Tarasenko, why not give him a shot, a change of scenery, and he would be a weapon on that first line for sure if they ended up going with him. But Dunn is a great pick as well, just getting that more of that talent on that defensive side of things. Moving into the Tampa Bay Lightning, we only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 picks left, 4 picks after this. So with Tampa Bay, they end up going with Yanni Gourde. For me, this was a toss-up. I ended up going with Gourde. Palat for me would have been sweet, but just because of that center depth, I went with Gourde. You got a guy that is going to be under contract until the 2023-2024 season. This isn't a guy that's going to be relied upon, in my opinion, to be a center that plays in the top 6. But for now, I have him in the top 6 just because of their center situation. But I think they'll make a move to go out and get a centerman potentially in this free agency. But you got a guy like Gourde, brings playoff experience, back-to-back Stanley Cups, a guy that can fit in nicely on a line and play a good role either on the defensive or offensive side of things. And yeah, I feel like Yanni Gourde is a solid choice, and that's who Seattle went with as well.
Yeah, Gourde would have been my choice. In my mock draft, I had Tyler Johnson, just solely as I felt that this is going to be a spot where we saw a side deal. I know Tampa's been going to offload that contract for a while. He's from Washington. He played in Spokane. It just seemed too good of a match, and that Tampa's going to have to move some cap, and I felt like Gordon's the guy they wanted to keep, and Johnson would have been an opportunity to come there.
Yeah, that would have been interesting if they went with Johnson. Could have definitely used him as a side piece in a trade, but yeah, they end up going with Gord. Like I said, I was tempted on taking Palat just because of his impact on that Tampa Bay Lightning team throughout the past few seasons, just in particular. But yeah, went with Gord just because of the lack of center depth, and you know, could be a guy down the line when this roster fully gets set and they're truly set. Could be a good third line guy playing in that top 9 role. But moving into the next pick here, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Jared McCann went. I had McCann as well. McCann, a guy that had a solid year with Pittsburgh, playing in that top 9. He's a guy that I feel like could bring a lot to a team. He's a guy that possesses the puck really nicely. A guy that can set guys up. A guy that can put up in the range of 10 to 15 plus goals around there. This is a good pick for them. Of course, the deal is right. The price is right. $2.94 million for him. And yeah, he'll be a nice addition to their left side. And he's a guy that can also play center as well, which is nice.
Yeah, to me, it's a toss-up between him and Kerfoot. McCann a little more sound defensively and it's a touch better offensively. As a Leafs fan, we just brought McCann in as, a security blanket to know they're essentially the same player. So you're just protecting one of them. Part of me hoped that it would Kerfoot to see what McCann can bring to the Leafs, but at the end of the day, it's not the worst case situation, and I think they made the great choice.
Moving into this next one with the Vancouver Canucks, they go with Cole Lind, right winger, RFA. I just went with this one in terms of just the money. I had Bowie at one point, just adding more to that D-core, but I felt like I had more D this time around when I redid my mock draft. Cole Lind, a young guy, saving money in the cap by getting him, and yeah, should be interesting to see what happens with him. I'm pretty sure that we do have the same pick, but what was your pick with Vancouver?
I also had Cole Lind. I've watched this guy for a long time. I actually had the luxury of playing against him in minor hockey. Yeah. He played up and played up. He was a couple of years younger, but playing up and skating circles around me. So I knew how good he was from a young age, and I've had the opportunity to interview his younger brother too, play some contacts. So I've watched that family a lot. And Lind, he's a borderline first-round pick. He didn't quite make the World Juniors in his last year eligibility. He's the last cut, but he's got offensive gifts. I think COVID just kind of got buried in that lineup. The opportunity to play as much this season. Similar situation to Kale Clark, I find. A little younger, and this is one of those. You got to take him. His upside's too high.
Yeah, for sure, and it's a strong hockey family, it seems, and with the Linds, and yeah, Cole Lind, a good pick for sure, a guy that could potentially crack an NHL lineup at some point, maybe with Seattle, depending on what happens. But going into Washington with their pick, you just say this guy's name because I can never seem to pronounce it right. Washington went with a goaltender, though.
Vitek Vanacek?
Vanacek, yeah.
I believe it's Vanacek. I didn't watch a lot of Capitals games, so I didn't really hear the pronunciation this year, but I don't think he could have really went wrong here. 25, he's under contract till next year. So that's huge. A guy that proved he could be a starter, and when Samsonov went down, no one had this guy pegged to be a starting goalie in the National Hockey League this season. And he came in and he weathered the storm. He proved it well. Ended up playing the starting job kind of into the playoffs. Everything got hurt. And I think it'll be a good choice. And it's a good backup, possibly to Drieger. It's going to be a battle. I don't think there's a true number one there yet. It's going to come down to who comes to camp and performs the best.
Yeah, and you'd have to think Drieger is going to be that guy, especially with the contract that they signed for him. But for sure, Vanasek just came in last year out of nowhere. Never heard of this guy, and had a good season with the Capitals. Even was starting at some points, which was interesting to see. But yeah, I picked Vanasek too, just because of that potential he's shown in Washington. I think that he'll be a good, at the very least, backup. Or maybe down the line if he ends up getting really good and he's pushing Drieger for minutes and they want to keep Drieger and roll with him, they could use Vanasek in a trade down the line. But yeah, definitely a great choice from the Seattle Kraken.
Yeah. Well, and another thing is, in the NHL, we're starting to transition towards a 1A and a 1B where you don't see the 70-30, 80-20 splits like you used to. You're starting to see more 60-40, 55-45. So having a 1A and a 1B, this could work out for them.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt about it. Could be one of those underrated goalie tandems in the league that's very effective. Moving into the last pick, the last team here, because Vegas isn't in the expansion draft. The Winnipeg Jets going with Mason Appleton. Can't go wrong with this pick. Just the potential that he's shown with the Jets. I think that he could have been potentially pushing for first line spot this year, at least in the top 6, with just how he's come along and developed. A guy that's put up 25 points this season in a COVID shortened season. But yeah, they end up picking Mason Appleton. Seattle did. I didn't end up picking Appleton. I ended up picking DeMello. DeMello is one of those guys that really gets talked about. Really good defensive defenseman, did wonders for Morrissey in the playoffs when they were paired with him. Not taking anything away from Montreal, but is it a coincidence that when he's out, we got swept by Montreal? I don't know. But yeah, just DeMello. I went with him. $3 million for a defenseman like that would have been fitted in really nicely in the top 4 with that team. But taking Mason Appleton, they get a guy that is still young, a guy that's finally starting to break through and getting some ice time in the Winnipeg Jets lineup this year and being a good forward. Definitely a great pick from Seattle there when you're talking about getting younger forwards in there.
Yeah, this is another guy that I don't mind them taking. I feel like they have a lot of players like Appleton though, so kind of left me scratching my head. And when you have a player like Dylan DeMello, a right-handed D, which is hard to come by now, it seems like, a relatively good contract at $3 million a year till 2024. I had him pegged as my number 1, number 2 pairing in my lineup, taking DeMello, and I feel like we're going to see a side deal. I know I've been reading on Twitter and all that Winnipeg was scared they're going to lose him, so I felt like there has to be some kind of deal worked out. And I guess we passed 6 o'clock now, so we'll probably be seeing some of these rumblings come through.
Yeah, and I picked DeMello just because of that lack of right D in this draft, right? And you're totally right. I see this guy, like I said, playing top 4 minutes, potentially on that first pairing, deciding what they want to go with. I'd have to say either him or Larson get that first pairing time with what they have right now, even though they don't have DeMello, like DeMello would have been in that top 4. But yeah, just there's really not many excellent right D to choose from in this draft, unless you go big like you did with PK Subban. But even then, I just feel like there was uncertainty there. Like you said, you already got wingers that, or I'm saying like you got wingers that are there already. I would have went on the defensive side of things myself and went DeMello, but Mason Appleton definitely a good pick for them. And like you said, could be a side deal done with him. But yeah, the draft has started now. It's being televised. And yeah, that was me and Jared's Seattle Kraken expansion mock draft list that we made. So let's just talk about some of the potential side deals that you see going down with this Seattle Kraken team? Just who you think could be on the move from the players that they picked and used in side deals?
I like a guy there's been a lot around. I think there's enough traction that Jared Down could possibly be on the move. And I feel like Seattle, the cap space they have, is they're planning to take a swing at some of these D-men in the UFA. They've already tried. They haven't been able to reach a deal yet. I know Dougie Hamilton was linked. One guy I think that could be going as well is a guy like maybe Mason Appleton. They have a lot of players in that bottom 6 to mid 6 role that I feel like there's going to be teams scratching at them.
Yeah. I didn't really think too much into the side deals and stuff like that, but it would be interesting if Giordano gets moved for sure. That'd be interesting. I could definitely see Mason Appleton getting moved, right? Of course, Winnipeg didn't want to lose him, but we did. It's just maybe even it would be interesting to see if this team somehow musters up a trade for like a Jack Eichel. I see Eichel going to LA, but it would definitely be interesting to see potentially Eichel coming here.
Yeah, Curtis McDermott is another guy that strikes me as a side deal coming. He kind of reminds me of one of those players that could be similar to Vegas traded away in like an Amlin type guy. Not quite as old, but he's gonna be a bottom 6 team, and maybe another team scratch at the door for that. Like a San Jose or something. LA doesn't want to trade in division.
Yeah. How do you feel that this Seattle Kraken team, who would you say is probably the biggest guy that they're looking at in free agency to bring in out of the big names? With guys like Ovi on the market, or he's a free agent this year, with guys like, Krejci, Hall, Suter, and Parise, other guys too. Which guys could you see potentially signing with Seattle this offseason?
Trying to look at the free agent market, and like we've talked about on the show already, centers is a need, and I'm not seeing a lot of maybe a Ryan Dzingel who has put up the lineup, maybe Casey Cizikas who's he's a third line, fourth line who played at the Islanders that guys love. I can't see Krejci leaving Boston, or else that's what I'd be all over him. They already took a swing at Landeskog. Colorado can't reach a deal. Maybe they'll circle back to that. Other guys in the market, depending on how many D they move, maybe they look at maybe a Ryan Suter. They moved Giordano or someone. Even if they don't move him, he could come in and play on the bottom 2 pairing and help bring some of this team along.
Yeah. I was thinking Ryan Suter would be a guy, another guy that, looking for a fresh start at this point after getting bought out by Minnesota. He's a guy that would bring veteran presence, a guy that would probably take less money than he's been making. I think that would be interesting, like you said, even if Gio gets moved or not. In terms of center, like I was looking at it today, David Krejci is a guy that at 35 years old still has a good game, but I don't see him leaving Boston like you said. I don't think Ovi would move at all on that wing because I feel like he'll be a Capital for life, in my opinion. But Taylor Hall, I feel like, I don't know.
I was reading today, and it sounds like Hall and Boston are close to a deal. So
I see Hall staying there because he's finally found his fit and not relied to be that first line center on that team, can play on that second line. And you definitely have to think Krejci would be coming back too because of how well those guys fit. So definitely going to be interesting. Like, Seattle has so much cap space, man. Like, how much? Like $40 million, something crazy like that at this point.
Yeah.
They built.
See, what do I have? I have the team on cap friendly here, just on the side screen. They had a projected 41 million cap space, but that is without the Larson. Well, they signed the Larson Drieger deals. I think I'm missing one more too.
Oleksiak,
yeah. He's been signed too. So
yeah.
So give or take 30 mil. To take a swing at maybe I guess Danault. He's a centerman that could be out there.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's going to walk. So I feel like he could be in line for Seattle could overpay for him. I feel like because they're going to need a center. But it'll be interesting to see how they spend that money. Maybe they just get to the cap floor and play how it is and poach someone later. Hard to say.
Yeah, and even if this is kind of a year where they're just kind of getting they roll with the roster that they have, like, this team's going to have a lot of cap space moving forward. Maybe some bigger names come up in the market next year that they could re-sign, right? Or maybe they could potentially trade some guys that they have and, package them for more picks to build up that draft stock. But this team has second overall pick in the draft, right? Like the NHL entry draft. That's crazy. What are the odds? Expansion team comes in and gets second overall pick. Wow.
Maybe that's the spot they'd look to go center too. But part of me actually is wondering if they are looking ahead to next year and saving all this cap space for maybe some big fish next year to maybe go after our offer sheet, maybe sign a big name for agency. It's kind of sit back, wait for the market to open up and take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people expected, almost everyone that you talk to who's a hockey fan expected a guy like Tarasenko to go. I know you didn't have him, but a lot of people were expecting that. Some people thought, maybe a JVR would go, like me and you had going. A lot of people seemed like people were leaning towards a guy like Domi at center, like I did, just because of the lack of center depth. But you got to think, with how much cap space these guys got and just the type of players that they have, like the Tanevs and the Appletons and the players like that, maybe they're looking to add in some big pieces and use guys like Tanev and the Appletons, the guys that they got like that, to, build around players like that.
Hard to say. It could be just, they drafted all these guys that we talked about have been, they've been bottom 9 forwards on most of their teams, and just hopefully they find a couple of diamonds like Vegas did and just bring into camp a bunch of grinders that have some heart, and maybe someone steps up and becomes a star that no one ever saw coming, Carlson or something. So hard to say. I'm no NHL scout, but I'm sure they did their homework and have a reasoning behind these choices.
Yeah, I mean, they're getting paid millions for doing this stuff, right? And they're more qualified to give picks than me and you, right, Bo? Where we're doing this for fun, which is the beauty of it. We can make these picks and get no repercussions for it. Just crazy the amount of pressure that a franchise starting up, I find, always has. Just what are they going to do? How are they going to succeed? And the bar that Vegas set is pretty high, making it to the Cup in their first year, making it to two Stanley Cup conference finals or semifinals in back-to-back seasons. It'll be interesting for sure. One thing that I feel like Vegas had the luxury of, though, is getting a world-class coach in Gerard Gallant. What do you think of Seattle's coach and Rick Tocchet?
I don't know how I feel about it. I felt like, did they go with Tocchet? I thought they went with Hackstall. Hackstall,
sorry. My apologies.
All good. He was a heck of a NCAA coach. He was a really good coach, and I believe it was North Dakota. Won some national titles there. I felt like he got the short end of the stick in Philly. He came into Toronto as assistant, and I would have liked a more like coach as a startup team, but I'm sure they went after, a Tortorella. They probably went after Gallant again.
Yeah.
I'm sure they did their work on these guys, and maybe Hackstall was one of the few that were willing to come.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm excited to see how this team does. Just with the type of players that they brought in, obviously they weren't lying when they said that cap space would be a huge focus for them, because they got plenty of that, and it'll be interesting to see who they bring in free agency and the deals that they'll make leading up towards the start of the season. But I guess that's going to do it for the ASTV Productions Seattle Kraken expansion mock draft special. The draft is on right now, even though all the picks have been announced. You guys can watch all the picks come through on TV, and see Seattle Kraken get officially announced tonight on live television. I know for you, Jared, you were supposed to have an episode of the AAA show airing tonight, but it didn't happen due to some unforeseen circumstances. So are we going to be able to see the AAA show airing next week at its regular scheduled time?
I'm not sure about next week. I've been kind of going by a week in this summer, just based on there's no hockey going on. Coaches and players, they're going to the lake, they're spending time with family. It's a little challenging lining guys up. I'm going to try and talk to a couple guys that I talked to for this week about possibly next week. If not, it will be the week after. And hopefully by mid-August, end of August, as the AAA season starts coming closer to a start, we can get back to weekly and hopefully have some live content for you guys this fall. I know it was a pretty dry winter talking AAA with no games to talk about, so I look forward to it.
I feel you, man. It sucked doing that because, you want to talk about the games that happened, but you gotta, for me at least, result into talking about how the last two seasons went, the expectations and all that. It's fun for a bit, and then it gets a bit stale after a while. But yeah, with the COVID situation here in Canada right now, I feel pretty confident that we see hockey here in Western Canada at all levels this year, coming up in 2021, 2022. But yeah, so Jared's got some good stuff coming up for the AAA show, of course, when the season does hit, and he's going to have some good guests on in the remaining summer months here. But as for me, Coffee with Graeme will be canceled tomorrow due to, just some more technical difficulties. We're doing an interview today, but then my guest Mike just went off the walls. Wasn't too great, but we're gonna have no Coffee with Graeme tomorrow morning. We'll have Coffee with Graeme for you guys next week on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central Daylight Time. You can catch that one on ASTV Productions on Facebook. ASTVProductions.com is our website, and that's announcements regarding that. The Prospect Show is also going to be airing an episode this week. Sorry I missed last week. Got my vaccine the night before and was feeling awful the next day, so was not in commission to be doing any shows. But I'm feeling good now, ready to get another edition of the Prospect Show out to you guys, 9 p.m. Central Daylight Time or 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Friday night is where you can catch that on our Facebook and our website. And that's going to do it for the Seattle Kraken expansion mock draft special here on ASTV Productions. I've been one of your co-hosts, Graeme Forsyth, joined by Jared Down, the other co-host of the AAA show. It was a lot of fun, man. Thanks for coming on and doing this with me.
Yeah, it was awesome. Too bad Cervelli had to spoil our fun today, but we made our best out of it, and hope everyone enjoyed the episode.
Yeah, can't get mad at him for doing his job, but also can get mad at him for ruining our fun. Special thanks to all the viewers, you the viewer, for tuning into this Seattle Kraken expansion mock draft special, and also a special thanks to our sponsors of this episode in AETI Evolve Green, and a commercial we haven't played yet in Toby Hockey, which we'll be ending off with. And yeah, until me and Jared see you next time, folks, have a good one. Stay safe out there. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday night, and have a good one. Peace.